Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today we're talking about episode 110, Educating Fran. As usual, we'll start with a brief summary of the episode. Maxwell's concerned that Maggie's philosophy professor may be giving her a little bit too much attention, so he sends Fran to investigate. Things do not go as anticipated. Professor Steve, primed by his horoscope's prediction that he'd meet a beautiful brunette with big brown eyes and exotic accent, asks Fran out. Maxwell objects to Fran going out with Steve, saying, well, obviously it could hurt Maggie, even though it's obvious to everyone that he's actually just jealous. Turns out Maggie actually did have a crush on Steve and only agrees to allow Fran to date him after Fran drops to her knees begging, saying that she's going to grow old and die waiting for Maxwell. Fran goes on the date and learns that Steve has a dog who is reminiscent of Maxwell. Not only is the dog named Max, but he has a black coat with a white patch over his eye, takes a while to warm up to people, and balks at the question, would you marry me? Unfortunately, Steve breaks things off with Fran after his psychic told him that she saw him with an older woman, getting married, having kids, and living in a split level in Great Neck. And he continues to believe that Fran is only in her mid-20s. Despite Fran and Maxwell confessing their feelings for each other, unfortunately to Niles, Niles still can't thread the needle and get them together. Bernadette, do you have anything you want to add?
I do not.
All right, would you like to take us to scene one?
Yes, so we open up in the kitchen. Yetta and Fran are there at the kitchen table, and Yetta asks Fran to read her horoscope. So Fran's like, oh, okay, Scorpio. Tomorrow you will awaken to, and Yetta goes, woohoo! And Fran's like, why? And Yetta's like, I heard tomorrow and awaken. I'm cool. At
Exactly.
this point, yeah, Maggie walks in and she starts talking about how her philosophy professor opened her eyes to realize that her eyes may not even be open. I mean, I may not even have eyes. I may not even exist. And Fran, of course, responds, according to your father, neither do I.
Mm-hmm.
And Maggie goes on and says, I mean, do you realize that red may not even be red? I mean, blue may not even be blue. And Fran's like, well, thank God gray can still become black, according to my mentor, later, Lady Clariel. Clariel. Clariel.
Correct. Clairol.
Clariel, yeah. Um, and Maggie goes on, you know what else Steve says? And Max, who's kind of been lingering behind them at the counter, interrupts and says, you call your professor Steve? And Maggie doesn't really pick up on the concern in his voice because she nonchalantly continues, oh, just over cappuccinos. Maxwell's like,
Mm-hmm.
you're having cappuccinos with Steve? And Fran's like, starts kind of rushing Maggie out of the room. You're talking so too much. Daddy's getting nervous. Shutty uppy. And so Maggie's no longer there, and Max says to Fran, of course I'm getting nervous. An older, distinguished man, a young, beautiful woman right under his nose, day after day. What do you think is going to happen? And Fran's like, well, according to my experience, nothing.
Uh-huh.
And Maxwell says, Miss Fine, I want you to go down to that university and talk to Margaret's professor, who probably has nothing but sex on the brain. And Fran's like, I've had worse assignments.
Correct.
And Maxwell, though, is like, I'm not joking. And Fran's like, oh, come on. Now, what is it going to look like if I go down there? I mean, the girl is 18 years old. And Maxwell's like, I don't care if she's 35. And Fran's like, which isn't old either. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell's like, you are her nanny. Now go, please. So Fran's like, all right. And Yetta's still kind of lingering and says, I'll go too and pick up a little education. I can only keep Sammy happy in the bedroom for so long. Sooner or later, he's going to want to talk. And
Correct.
that is the opening scene. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I don't know if I should say this for later, but I don't want to forget. Did Maggie's summary of her discussion with Professor Steve remind you of any other conversations she had? perhaps in season one.
Not off the top of my head.
So in season one, there's the episode A Plot for Nanny, where Maggie is very, very excited that she's going to go out with this guy, Philip. And then she does. And then the next morning, she says something along the lines of, oh, this Philip is so intense. We spent hours discussing the nature of consciousness and whether or not something really exists. Like this table, is it really here? Or is it only here because we see it? And if we weren't here to see it, would it disappear? Um, and then, like, at the end of the scene, um, it, uh, Brighton and Gracie pick up on that, and because Maggie's really excited that she gets to sit at Philip's table and to sit with him and all his friends. And Brighton asks, "Well, when you show up, will does the table exist, or will all of his friends disappear, or something like that?" So just
Mm,
to me, it was reminiscent of that.
yeah.
Um, so I'll take us to season two. Sorry,
Scene
scene
2?
two. Oh gosh, new year, same Google trips. Anyway, so Fran and Yetta are at school, and Yetta's talking about how she remembers when she was a student going to school and how she used to walk past the daisy field carrying her little metal lunch pail, and Pa was chopping wood, and Fran's like, Yetta, that's the opening sequence to Little House on the Prairie. And so then they walk into a classroom, and Fran asks the guy standing there, are you Professor Steve? And he is, and Yetta steps in front of Fran. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a grown man taking advantage of innocent young women. Do you do any private tutoring? And Fran like grabs her and is like, Yetta, go wait for me downstairs. Just don't lie down anywhere near pre-med. She turns to Professor Steve and she's like, well, look, I'm here because Mr. Sheffield is very concerned that you might be paying just a little bit too much attention to his daughter. And Professor Steve says, I give all of my students special attention. Some of them just misinterpret it. And then he's like, well, let's look at the notes that I get here. Dear Steve, I love you, Ashley. I get lost in your eyes, Karen. You look sexy when you don't shave, Philip. Both of them exchange a look. And he's like, third row, Bette Midler sweatshirt. And Fran's like, okay, well, the point is you're not interested in Maggie. And that's what I came to find out. Now I feel like I've earned my $6 an hour. And she starts to walk out. And he stops her by saying, oh, wow. And she's like, what? He's like, well, my horoscope said that I'd meet a beautiful brunette with big eyes and exotic accent. And Fran's like, get out of here. He's like, no, see, I'm really into astrology. What's the date and time of your birth? And she's like, 5 p.m., November 26th. Yeah, Ma had to induce labor so she wouldn't miss the Thanksgiving meal. And he's like, well, what year? 1970, she says. It's like, hey, we are so compatible. You want to get dinner? And she's like, well, that's very flattering, but I'm actually seeing a therapist about this very problem. He's like, oh, so I'm not your type? She's like, that's so not it. I'm just late for my doormats without partners meeting. And he's like, how about Saturday? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, oh, wait, that's my nephew's bar mitzvah. And she's like, oh, and that's the scene. Do you want to add it? Do you want to add anything?
Nope.
All right. Would you like to take us into the kitchen?
Yeah, so we're in the kitchen and Cece and Niles are watching a portable TV that just appeared on the counter because that's not where it usually is. But anyway, and Niles is sobbing, "No, Papa," because you can hear people speaking Spanish. And Cece goes, "Why the hell are you watching a Spanish soap opera?" And Niles is like, "Shh, something big just happened." And Cece's like, "What?" And Niles is like, "I have no idea." Cece goes, "Oh, Niles, just when I think you are so pathetic, you go and top yourself." And Niles is like, "Well, I'm sorry we can't all learn Spanish the way you did, chasing frightened tourists down the streets of Pamplona."
Diploma.
Pamplona. At that time, Maxwell walks in. Um, well, I think Cece leaves, and then Maxwell walks in, and Niles hurriedly picks up the broom next to the counter and says that he needs to go sweep Master Brighton's room. And Maxwell, in a Spanish accent, says, "Oh, you mean the room with the broken television?" And
Mm-hmm.
Niles quickly changes directions and says, "I meant the living room." And he rushes through the door to the living room. Fran walks in at that time and from the side door, and Maxwell asks her how it went. And Fran says, "Better than expected." And she's kind of evasive, right? She's not really giving much. But Maxwell's like, "Oh, come on, I want to know." Fran's like, "Oh, nothing, nothing. Not at all. He's not at all interested in Maggie. He's interested in me."
Mhm.
And of course, that catches Maxwell's ear. "What? What do you mean he's interested in you?" And Farron's like, "Calm down, calm down. He just asked me out on a date. I didn't say yes." Maxwell says, "Good." And Farron continues, "I didn't say no either." And of course, Max was like, "Well, why not? What do you mean?" And Fran's like, "Why? Should I have?" And Maxwell's like, "Of course." Fran's like, "Why? Do I have any prior engagements?"
Mhm.
It's fine. And Fran goes on, "Mr. Sheffield, I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I mean, a man asks me out and I say, I'm sorry, but I'm in a totally monogamous relationship. And the only part I leave out is that I'm in it by myself."
Yup.
Max was like, "It's fine. What do you want me to say?" And Fran's like, "Well, I would like you to give me one good reason why I should not say yes to that man." And in walks Maggie through the side door. Well, not yet. Max is like, "I should have thought that was pretty obvious, but do you want me to say it? Go ahead and say it." And in walks Maggie, and he goes, "I'll go ahead and say it. It could hurt Margaret." And Fran's like, "Oh well, if this was a cartoon right now, you would be strapped to the back of an Acme moon rocket. Maggie
Yep.
could care less if I go out with Steve." And Maggie, in classic Maggie fashion, goes, "What? How could you do this to me, Fran? I hate you." And runs.
Mhm.
And Fran's like, "Oh God, now this right after, right on the heels of Brighton crashing the Mercedes." And Maxwell's like, "Oh my God," and starts like going towards the living room. And meanwhile, Fran is kind of screwing up this back stairwell, and Maxwell quickly corrects course and goes, "We don't own a Mercedes, Miss Fine," and chases her upstairs.
Correct.
Did you count the next one separately or is it continuation?
I counted it separately, but if you wanna keep going, you can.
Okay. Well, because again, we see Fran run up and into Maggie's room, locking it behind her, and Maxwell's chased her up the stairs and is knocking, um, saying, "I know you're in there." And Fran's like, "Well, move over, Columbo." And then goes towards Maggie, who's on her bed. "Oh, Maggie, I'm so sorry. I had no idea by the way you were acting that you had a crush on Steve." Which, side note, really? Like,
Yeah,
usually Fred's pretty perceptive, and that's why she even went down there in the first place was because Maxwell was concerned. But anyway, Maggie's like, "What am I supposed to do? Parade myself in some tight little sweater and throw myself at him? That's so desperate." And of course, Fran gets that look on her face. And Fran even says, "You kids have no respect for the classics." And, she's sitting next to Maggie on the bed. "Honey, if you don't want me to go out with him, just say so. I respect your feelings." And Maggie's like, "Well, I don't want you to go out with him." And Fran's like, "Well, then I won't go out with him. I love you and I'd never do anything to hurt you." She like gets up, starts walking towards the door, and Maggie says to her, "I love you too, Fran." And then Fran immediately turns around, drops to her knees, I guess, and starts like wailing, like pleading, "Then please let me go out with him. I'm going to grow old and die waiting for your father. You're so young and blonde and rich. You could have a zillion good looking Goyisha
Goyesha, yeah,
guys. How, how many gorgeous Jewish guys are there still left that are single at my age? Oh, please, Maggie, let me go out with him, please." And Maggie's like, "Fran, I guess you do kind of have a point. I mean, it is harder to find a guy at your age, and I am young, and you are old. Okay, you can go out with him." Fran's like, "Oh, thank you for your mercy. Thank you." And then we hear knocking at the door again, and it's Maxwell saying, "I'm waiting." And Fran just says, "How does it feel? Do you have anything you'd like to add?"
I do not.
Okay, can you take us to Steve's apartment?
So we start outside Steve's apartment, and Fran is there, and she's talking to herself that she's just going to forget about Maxwell Sheffield, have a good time. And she knocks, and Steve comes to the door, and who also comes to the door with him but his dog, whose name is Max. And as I've already described, he's a black dog with a white patch over his eye, kind of like Maxwell Sheffield's gray patch in his hair. Um,
Mhm.
and he like Max comes to the door, and Steve tries to get Max to get back in the apartment and not like overwhelm Fran. And Fran greets him, "Hi, good doggy." And Steve tells her, Max takes a while to warm up to you, and she's like, "Yeah, I know the breed." He tells her to come in, make herself comfortable, um, and she does. And you know, he says that he's going to check on dinner, and she's like, "Great, thanks." And then to herself, she says, "This whole thing just feels so wrong. I'm going to make an excuse. I got to get out of here." And she starts to like walk out. And before she can get to the door, we hear Steve from the kitchen saying that he makes a killer lasagna. Fran stops, turns around. "Well, I don't want to be rude." And so she like takes her coat off. She sits on the couch, and you know, well, does she? I don't remember. She does. Yeah, she sits on the couch briefly, and so she looks at Max, and she's like, "Well, this is freaky." Steve comes in, and he has two glasses and a bottle of wine behind his back, and he asks her, "Do you like red wine or white?" And she's like, blueberry." He's like, "Oh, how did I know that?" And so he pours glasses for them, and he's like, "So Fran, before you got here, I did your chart, and your planets are very well aligned." And she's sipping on the wine. She's like, "Well, actually, one moon is a little lower than the other. I take after my mother." And she laughs. And you can tell that he does not like her laugh because he says, "There's that cute little giggle." And she's like, "Well, if you don't, well, don't give me too much of this stuff or I'll be laughing all night." He immediately takes her glass away from her.
Mhm.
And so then she's like, "Well, do you need any help or anything?" He's like, "No, no, I'm doing all the work. You just lie back and don't do a thing." And she's like, "Oh, okay. Okay." So she goes and lies on the couch. She crosses her legs at the ankle. She has her feet up on the couch, and Max, the dog, is by her feet. Um, and she says to him, "Okay, Max, you can go now. There's not enough room on this couch for three." The dog just sits there staring at her, kind of incredulously. "All right, let's go. Move it." And that doesn't work. So she sits up, lifts Max's ear, says, "Max, would you marry me?" The dog jumps up and runs away. She leans back. Works every time.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
what did you think of that little moment where he takes that glass away from her?
I mean, it's not a good sign for a budding relationship.
Nope.
Although, side
No.
note, also maybe don't go to someone's apartment for a first date. Also seems kind of risky.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's just me and my paranoia.
I mean, unfortunately, it's the world we live in, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, so now we go to the kitchen at the Sheffield residence. Maxwell's coming downstairs in a robe. It's obviously kind of late at night. Um, he kind of looks in the back where there's some cabinets. I never really noticed they
Noticed.
had food
Yeah.
back there. Yeah. He apparently doesn't find what he was looking for because he goes to the intercom and says, "Niles, Niles, Niles, are you sleeping?" And of course, Niles eventually comes on sounding tired and saying he's just getting his papers ready for his route. And Maxwell asks him where the microwave popcorn is, or has he seen it? And Niles is like, "You see the box on the counter that says microwave popcorn? Try that." And of course, we see very blatantly on the counter is the microwave popcorn.
Yep.
And Max was like, "Alrighty." He mentioned something about Niles being a chatterbox, not being able to go back to bed or something. Maxwell goes over, picks up the microwave popcorn box, is like kind of reading it, and he's starting to make his way back to the intercom when suddenly Niles appears behind him.
Hmm.
And Niles is like, "Oh, just give me that." Um, And then anyway, they start a conversation. I was just like, "Oh, is something troubling you, sir?" Maxwell's like, "Oh, Miss Fine. I mean, I'm fine." And Niles is like, whenever I can't sleep, it's because there's something on my mind that's gnawing at me. Um, something me gnawing at me.
Yes,
Something like
he says there's it's usually because there's something on my mind that's gnawing at me, that's making my guts twist.
yeah, yes. And of course, Maxwell actually does admit that he's jealous. And he's able to say this to Niles because he's not in love with him. And Niles is like, well, nobody looks good at 2 in the morning. It's kind of looking
Yeah.
a little, I
Sheepish.
don't know. Yeah. Like, nobody looks good at 2 in the morning. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that scene?
I do not.
Can you take us to the living room?
Yeah, so Cece has picked up the watching the Spanish telenovelas, and we hear she's sitting on the couch, and we hear on the television, "No, no, no, no! I Carmencita!" And Niles rushes in, "Carmencita shoot Poppy?" Cece's like, "See."
Well, I thought Cece, sorry, I thought Cece said that.
Oh, you're
Never
right.
mind.
You're right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you are so right. Because she says, "No, I Carmencita." And then Niles
Mhm.
rushes in, "Carmencita, shoot Papi." And she says, "Sí." And he's like, "Is Papa?" And she chimes in, "Muerte." And
Yeah.
and Maxwell walks in and he's like, "Honestly, do the two of you have nothing better to do than watch this drivel in the middle of the afternoon?" And they like kind of walk away muttering in Spanish. And I, not gonna lie, I didn't catch any of what they said. Um,
Mhm.
And so Maxwell encounters Fran and he says to her, "Well, you were out rather late last night, I think." And she's like, "Well, I had such a wonderful time with Steve. He made me a delicious dinner and he rented a video, The Commitments." And he's like, "So are you planning to see him again?" She's like, "Yep." And the doorbell rings and Brighton gets it. And it's Steve. And Brighton's like, "You're Steve?" "Oh, dad." And he like pats Maxwell on the arm, on the shoulder or whatever. And it's like, "Oh, no, no, no. She could still pick you." And he walks off. And so Fran introduces Steve to Maxwell. "This is Mr. Sheffield. Mr. Sheffield, this is Steve." You see, I call him Steve. He calls me Fran. We know each other 2 days. That's all I want to say. And, which, side note, if I were Steve and not there to break up with Fran, I would have found that very odd.
Yeah.
And so then Maxwell introduces himself. "I understand you teach philosophy, study of objective thought, and yet I hear you're into astrology, the pastime of the tutti frutti." That's all I want to say, he says to Fran. And then Maxwell walks off, and Cece walks in. And she's like, "The boy is right. He is smoking." "Hello,
Mm.
Steve." Cece Babcock. They shake hands. "I understand you're a professor and you're going out with Nanny. Fine. What's the matter? Research wouldn't give you a chimp?" And Fran's like, "If you didn't have toilet paper on your shoe, I'd be so upset with you right now." So she turns
Mhm.
her attention to Steve. "So, Steve, tell me, what do you want to do tonight?" And he's like, "Fran, I have to break up with you." And she's like, "I was thinking of seeing Titanic, but apparently I'm already on it." He's like, "Look, the thing is, I saw my psychic today, and she said I should be in a relationship with a woman older than you. You know, and Fran's like, "That's ridiculous. Who's older than me?" And he's like, "Well, come on, Fran. You were born in 1970." She's like, "I was." "Oh, yeah, I was. Give or take a year or six." And he's like, "Look, Fran, I feel terrible about this, but my psychic sees me with a woman in her mid-30s, having kids, getting married, living in a split level house in Great Neck." And Fran's like, "But what if I told you I was 34?" And he's like, "Oh, Fran, I'd never believe that." She's like, "Yeah, you're right. Who am I kidding?"
Yep.
Poor Fran. Do you have anything you want
Mm,
to add?
I do not.
Would you like to take us
Um,
back to the kitchen?
yes, so we are back in the kitchen again late at night. This time it's Fran who's down there. And she goes to the intercom, calls for Niles, and of course he answers sleepily again, saying that he was just going to the barn to milk Bessie. And Fran starts to ask, when I told you last week to hide the Interman's Louisiana crunch cake because mom was coming over, she's not even fully done with that when Niles appears behind her. Um, and he just, he's put out for having been woken up that, late or early, however you want to say it, but he gets the cake and puts it out and asks Fran what's wrong. And again, she relates what it was and like how it's so dumb. He talked to some type of dumb psychic, told him to break up. Like who would do that? Um, And Niles reminds Fran that she watches this or calls or watches the Psychic Friend Network.
Mhm.
But
She calls
Fran's like,
them.
"Oh, that's Dionne Warwick." So, that's something totally different. Um, and then she it's going on and on about how it again, it's the age old problem with her and Mr. Sheffield. Um, and Niles is encouraging her to talk to him, to tell him. Um, and Fran kind of is like, "Oh, you should go into the Dead Sea with hemorrhoids."
Yep.
Uh, and what they're talking again about the age because Niles is like, you want someone who accepts you, and um Fran's talking about how Mr. Sheffield accepts that she was born in 1970, and Niles is like, he knows you're lying. And Fran's like, yeah, he accepts me for the woman I'm really not.
Correct.
Yeah. And anyway, she's talking about why is she dating nut jobs anyway? And um Niles is like, why tell me? Like Niles is encouraging Fran essentially to talk with Maxwell, right?
Right.
And go ahead.
I said right.
Okay. And Fran's like waves it away. She's like, what? It's 2 a.m. That would be inconsiderate of me. Again, the funny thing being that she had no problem waking up Niles at 2 a.m.
Mhm.
Her cake. Is there anything you'd like to add to that scene?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Will you take us to the next one?
Sure. So the doorbell rings and Fran's coming downstairs and Gracie shouts to her, Fran, the guy who dumped you is back again. And Fran's like, what the hell is he doing here? I don't want to see him. How's my lipstick? And Gracie's like, it's okay. She's like, all right, let him in. And so he comes in and he gives her a box of Godiva chocolates. And she's like, well, look who's here. Did the psychic tell you you'd come crawling back carrying Godivas? Because I could have saved you that 50 bucks. And he's like, well, actually, I just thought you might like them. Philip left them on my desk. And Fran, my psychic was right. I've met an older woman who I really like. Fran's like, well, who cares? I wouldn't date you if you whistled Dixie. Who walks by but Cece whistling Dixie with the comment, don't wait up. And
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell comes from the back and he's like, Miss Fine. And she's like, yes, Mr. Sheffield. It's like, did I hear Steve? She's like, yeah, you did. He was here, but I sent him away because I knew that you were so jealous that I was dating him that I didn't want fist fighting to break out. And he's like, Miles told me everything. She's like, oh, I'm such a loser. Now I'm lying about two relationships I don't have. And he's like, come on, Miss Fine. I'll tell you what, I'll buy you a drink. And don't forget to bring your ID just in case they want to card you. And they
Mm-hmm.
like look at each other and Niles says, I love you. And they both say something along the lines of, we love you too, Niles. And he's just
Yeah.
like so frustrated.
Yeah, because they're obviously sharing a moment. They're getting, you know, together and cozy, and Niles is standing in for the audience, right? He's in the background watching this and he's like very pointedly saying, "I love you." And they just
Mm-hmm.
totally don't get it. "We love you too, Niles." As they walk
Exactly.
away. So yeah, our final little scene um is in the Sheffield residence. Max the dog was randomly there with Fran, and Fran's, getting Max to go on the couch, and she's like, "Speak." He speaks. Down. He goes down. Kiss. He gives her a kiss, and she's like, "Oh, if only life was that easy." And that's the episode.
That is. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get into our sticks?
I don't think so. How about you?
I do. Um,
Okay, go ahead.
I just this one thing that kind of bugged me. Um, it's sort of like we've talked about how the Sheffield house is sort of like the nanny version of the room of requirement. It shifts and changes. Here we have
Yeah.
a similar situation with Fran's birthday. And now I
Mhm.
understand that she's lying about being born in 1970 to seem younger than she is, because that would put her in her like mid 20s instead of her mid 30s.
Mhm.
But we know from a previous episode that so she tells him that she was born in November. Um, we know from previous episodes she was born on Rosh Hashanah, which is one of the Jewish New Years. And according to our friends at I think Wikipedia, was it Wikipedia? Um, the latest time in the year that Rosh Hashanah could fall is actually early October.
Oh.
So that doesn't make a lot of sense. Tiny little spoilers. So for those who don't want spoilers, like fast forward. In a later episode, Fran's mom Sylvia makes a comment about how Fran was born while Kennedy was president, and everyone was optimistic. So like she didn't just lie about 6 years; it would have been 7 or more years. Just
Mhm.
saying. So
Yeah.
that kind of bothered me a little bit, and I just needed to share that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you're very welcome. All right. If you don't have anything, I'm ready to go into our shticks.
Okay. Let's jump then into favorite fashion. Was there any fashion you liked in particular or disliked?
Yes. Um, I really liked what Fran wore on her date with Steve, the black and white dress. It has the thin spaghetti strap on the shoulder and then off the shoulder little sleeves with like a black and white pattern and then vertical black and white stripes.
Yeah.
I really
I
like
will
that.
note, generally speaking, Fran seems to be more of the classic Fran outfits, like and hair this particular episode, like a lot more of the animal print we're used to seeing.
And
Um,
the big hair, except in the scene where Steve dumps her.
yes. Then she has kind of a shorter bob like
Yeah,
thing.
very sleek.
Not short, short, but shorter than her normal length of hair. Um, I actually liked like Cece's red coat that she wears when she's leaving with Steve.
Agreed.
Uh, it was nice. I know that again, the actress is pregnant. So you notice throughout the entire episode, again, hiding her kind of behind documents and like the counter and all that kind of stuff. But that
Hmm.
red coat was very nice. Um, I also kind of liked Maggie's outfit when she overhears um that again Steve wants to date Fran or whatever. It's a very classic 90s look. Like it's
Hmm.
very reminiscent. The only thing is like I wouldn't wear tights cuz she's wearing like white tights, but she has kind of like a brownish tan jacket with
Hmm.
like brown skirt. It's like a not quite a white turtleneck. It's a little bit lower than
Like
an
a mock
actual.
neck.
Yeah. And then is it some type of like would you call it like a little vest or something
It's
with
like a
it?
short jacket, kind of.
Well, because there's the jacket and then under but anyway, it like is and even how the hairstyle, it's very 90s to me.
Hmm.
So that just kind of took me back. And I know that's kind of running into 90s nostalgia, but
That's okay.
again, it was very classic for me. So any other fashion you'd like to discuss?
The only other piece of fashion I think I want to discuss is what Fran is wearing uh, when Steve comes with the Godiva. She has this bright yellow headband in her hair, a brown, sort of velvety looking. I think it is a turtleneck, but maybe it's a mock neck also. Um, but her skirt is this like cream colored skirt with a cat on it,
Oh yeah.
which I just thought was worth commenting on.
Hmm.
So that's all I
Yep.
want to say.
Yep. After having so many, like I couldn't tell if it's leopard or cheetah print. Her outfits earlier, so it's a different type of cat print. Ha, ha.
Correct. Literally.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready to jump into notable New Yorkers?
Yes, we are.
Okay. First question: is the title referencing anything in particular?
That's a good
The
question.
title Educating Fran. And aside from like Steve being a philosophy professor, I don't know if this is a very good like title just because unlike in previous seasons where like was it Cece's brother who
Yes,
like was
that
actually
was
tutoring?
Yeah, that was Franny and the professor.
Yeah, like in that episode, there's actually an attempt to educate Fran, whereas the only kind of connection to education is that Steve is a
A
philosophy.
professor. Yeah,
Yeah. So I didn't know if there was any specific reference. If there was, I didn't really pick up on it.
I didn't either.
Okay. Question, did you put like horoscopes or anything like
I
that on your
didn't,
list?
but maybe I should have.
Eh, That's okay. Like
Okay.
we can
I
move
mean,
on.
yeah, horoscopes are how people who follow astrology make predictions about what will happen in their lives,
Hmm.
as we gathered.
Yeah. Clairol?
Um, so Clairol is an American personal care company, for lack of a better word, that specializes in hair color and hair care. It was founded in 1931. I'd say it's best known for its Miss Clairol home hair color kit, which it introduced 25 years later. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Hmm. Little House on the Prairie?
A television series that ran from 1974 until 1983 about the Ingalls family in the American Midwest, and it takes place in the 19th century, according to our friends at IMDb.
Did you, out of curiosity, recognize the actor who played Steve when you saw him?
I did not. Did you?
I did.
Oh, okay. Then who is he?
Harry Hamlin?
Yes. What is he known for? Other than the nanny,
Um,
obviously.
yeah, I wouldn't be able to specifically. I know married to Lisa Rena or Lisa Rena? Rena? Why can't I pronounce her name?
I
Um,
don't know,
did
but I will
did he do
believe you.
soaps as well?
So he's done a lot of television and film. Um, he's been on thing. So back in like the 1970s, he appeared in The Taming of the Shrew. He's been on I think he was on Army Wives, LA Law, um, Poisoned by Love, um, obviously The Nanny, Outer Limits, like Father Like Santa, Quarantine, Touched by an Angel, um, Law and Order, um, Curb Your Enthusiasm, maybe. I mean, he's been in like one episode of a lot of these series.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it's like he's one of those that oh, I guess he was also Perseus in Clash of the Titans. But anyway, uh Lisa Rinna. Why can't I talk? But yeah, I just generally recognize him for his various from his various works.
okay, well, the list I was compiling is from our friends at IMDb,
Okay.
so we be sure to give them credit.
Yes. Again, we have another Bette Midler reference
Mm-hmm. The
with Philip
pamphlet,
wearing the sweatshirt.
yep.
Um, and then Doormats Without Partners is not an actual group, I don't believe.
I didn't think it was.
No. Did you put astrology
I did not.
or no? Okay.
No, kind of with the same with the horoscopes.
Generally telenovelas.
They are Spanish language programming that uh, similar to a soap opera, but I believe they always end in a happy ending. They're over dramatic.
Mm. I didn't know about the happy ending part.
I'm honestly basing that off watching the television show Jane the Virgin, so I
Oh,
might not be the best authority.
yeah. Did you have like the Acme moon rocket?
I did not, but that's definitely a reference to is it Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner?
Yeah, like generally Looney Tunes
Yeah,
or
like Looney Tunes, like um, yeah,
yeah. Okay. Columbo. I think we had him before,
we
right? Or
did,
sorry, prior to that we had Mercedes.
which we also had before.
Yeah.
We also had Pamplona, which the reference is Running of the Bulls. So Niles was because Niles' comment to Cece was that not all of us can learn Spanish like you did running through chasing tourists through the streets of Pamplona. So he's calling her a bull.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Niles.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see here. I again, um, I feel like there weren't as many. I don't
There
know
weren't.
if the Carmen Sita was referencing a specific telenovela, but I wouldn't know
Yeah, I
if
didn't
that was
think so.
a specific one. The Commitments.
A 1991 musical film based on the 1987 novel by the same name, which tells the story of a young music fanatic who assembled a soul band from working class youths. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
I believe we've had Titanic before
I don't
or
think
not.
we have,
Okay.
but so there are two different references in her reference to the Titanic. The first is the 1997 movie titled Titanic, which tells a fictionalized romance story about the ill-fated luxury steamliner that hit an iceberg and sank, killing many, many people on board. And actually, because of the Titanic disaster, that's why there need to be lifeboats with enough seats for everyone on board.
Hmm. Did you put the Enterman's Louisiana
Yes, I
crunch
did.
cake? Okay.
And I quote, a moist yellow cake with a crunchy, nutty sensation topped with a decadent coconut glaze. And that's according to our friends at entenmann's.com.
The Psychic Friends Network.
A telephone psychic service from the 1990s that began to migrate online in 2012. Oh, and
Hmm.
that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Dionne Warwick.
We've had before, but basically an American singer, television host, and former Goodwill ambassador for the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. That's also according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Whistling Dixie.
So Dixie was an 1857 song likely composed by Daniel Decatur Emmett, which is about the southern United States and has become a folk song.
Hmm. Do you have any more?
The only other reference I had here would be the Dead Sea, which
Oh yeah.
is um, it's saltwater based. It's very salty, which was why Fran told Niles just take a dip in the Dead Sea with the hemorrhoid. It's so salty that people actually float on it.
Hmm. Okay. So are you ready then for some Unishakop?
Yeah, again, there isn't that much here. Goyesha, that's basically
Mm-hmm.
someone who isn't Jewish, someone who doesn't look Jewish. Um,
Hmm.
did you notice when Fran was in the hallway about to go into Steve's apartment, there was a mezuzah on his door frame?
Oh, I
Um,
didn't realize that.
there's a little, there's a mezuzah. It's a little prayer scroll, for lack of better words. And it was actually placed appropriately. It's supposed to be hung on the right hand side when you're walking into a room. Um, and it's supposed to be in the top third of the door, and it's supposed to be tilted, from I guess left to right. Um, and yeah, and then
Hmm.
the only other thing I noticed was at Steve's apartment, we see a Hanukkah in the background with candles, which indicates to me that it's like November, December, but I don't know. The timing seemed odd to me. The Hanukkah is the technical term for what most people refer to as a menorah. Menorah means just candelabra. Hanukkah is the one with the 8 arms plus the shamash, the helper candle. So
Oh,
9.
okay. Hmm. So that's
That's all I
kind
had.
of cool that they actually did incorporate some of that like into his home.
Yeah, I mean, for the record though, we see the same things when we're at the Fine family home. So
Hmm.
it's not very creative, kind of
Hmm.
repetitive, but whatever.
Okay.
They tried.
Hmm.
Oh, and I suppose I should mention bar mitzvah, which we've talked about before. That was why
Hmm.
Steve was like, let's go Saturday. Oh, wait, that doesn't work. It's my nephew's bar mitzvah, whatever.
Hmm. And that's
Uh,
what gave her the clue that he was Jewish.
correct. Correct. All right, I'm
Hmm.
out.
Okay. So some 90s nostalgia.
Old cars.
Yes. Like I mentioned too, there's that old TV they had CC and Niles were watching in the kitchen.
Correct.
Um, Again, these days, they probably be watching it like on an iPad or or a
Yeah,
phone or something a bit more mobile.
correct. The intercom looked dated, but it always
Yes.
looks dated. Um,
Hmm. Like I mentioned, like Maggie was just like the epitome of 90s fashion in this episode.
Yeah, as was Gracie, the one for the few seconds we saw her.
Mhm.
The fact that like Brighton didn't know what Steve looked like until he showed up at the door, that seems sort of
Mhm.
outdated now because guess what? There's social media and people put their
Mhm.
pictures all over the place.
Yeah, and also just even if Steve's like a professor at a college, then you would think that he would be on the faculty page. So if
Correct.
Brighton overheard that, oh, he's a philosophy professor at Maggie's university, he could easily look him up.
Correct.
But yeah, similarly, kind of just I don't know, to some extent, Steve actually coming all the way to see Fran to break up with her. I mean, I guess that's like just generally a night, like, I guess if you're going to do it in person. But I feel like these days it would be more apt, like, more people are more likely to do it over the phone,
Or
like
ghost.
texting or ghost. Um, but I will say that astrology, I think, has had a resurgence of like online. Like, there's definitely a culture around astrology, like these days.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Hmm. Like on TikTok and like Instagram and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, I always kind of thought that the like calling a psychic that Fran has done previously, like obviously we haven't seen it, but like we heard about it in the episode Ship of Fran's, where Fran was like, her psychic told her she was going to dance on water with the man of her dreams. To me, that felt a little dated in the fact that we have a reference to the fact that Fran also calls Psychic Friends Network. Seems a little
yeah,
dated.
calling. Yeah, yeah, like the phone kind of psychics are dated. They've
Correct.
kind of evolved since then to like live streaming and all that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
it's just, like I said, evolved over time. Um,
Right.
anything else that you want to talk about in the
I
90s nostalgia?
I think that's it. How about you?
Um, I think that's it too.
Okay. We
So, unfortunately, we can't add to the kiss count.
correct.
Um, so I guess we're up to future fun.
So, unsurprisingly, we never see Steve again.
Mhm.
Um, so that's the first thing. We do see Cece in a
It didn't
different.
work out with Cece.
It did not. It did not. But we do see Cece in a different, longer term relationship. And I'll give everyone a hint. It's not with Maxwell.
Mhm.
Despite her best efforts, even after he is spoken for, despite her best efforts. Um, let's see. In 2 episodes, Fran and Maxwell are going to go on a disastrous second date finally. But before that, next time, Maxwell is going to propose to Fran, but it goes nowhere because she doesn't hear him and he doesn't remember asking her. So,
Wow.
yeah,
What how many times does that make it that he's proposed up
too
until then?
many, too
Yep.
many. And each time thus far, he has gotten out of it. Um,
Mhm.
that will continue for
Mhm.
longer than the audience wants. Um,
Mhm.
and finally, I hope this is obvious, maybe it's not, but Fran and Maxwell will eventually get on a first name basis. And that happens in the episode
Whoa.
Call Me Fran. Um, and their relationship greatly accelerates shortly thereafter in all kinds of good ways, some not so good
Mhm.
ways, but there's a lot of positive to come. So, yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
Okay, so then it's time for our episode ratings. As a reminder to our lovely listeners, we rate each episode from 1 to 5 lipsticks, with 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. This is just for fun, it's arbitrary. We reserve the right to adjust our um, scores later on. And I believe I have to go first this week.
oh, thank goodness.
So I'm struggling here
I
a bit,
know.
because I'm not blown out of the water, but I'm not like super offended. I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Like, generally speaking, this has been a pretty low rated season
I
thus far.
know. I know.
Um, again,
I will point out
I
it does get better. At least
yeah.
parts of it get better.
Yeah, like so like part of it is that like I don't know. There's like cute little moments like towards the end again where Maxwell's going to buy her a drink and cheers her up by saying, she should bring her ID in case they card. And Niles is standing in for the audience, like, I love you. Um,
Mhm.
but again, I mean, there was that red flag with Steve not liking Fran's laugh. I mean, like, to be fair, Maxwell has also commented about her laugh before. Like, it's a running joke of the series, but still it was a bit of like a red flag.
It's a bit jarring, frankly.
Yeah. I don't know, Debbie. I'll just give it a 4.
Okay. Okay.
What do you think?
I basically agree with everything you said. This is a very low rated season. Jeez. Um, most of the episodes I have not enjoyed greatly. Um, but compared to like the last couple, this is significantly better. Um, I don't actively try not to watch this episode, but I also don't like go out of my way to watch it. I'll watch it because like it's around other episodes that spoiler I like a little bit better. So yeah, I think I'm also gonna give it a 4 because I just don't want to deal with it anymore.
The pressure of rating an episode.
It's
Like,
crushing.
for episodes where you love it, it's easy. 5. For episodes that really make you mad, like it's easier to give it, a low score. It's these kind of intermediary episodes where you're like, it's fine.
Yeah, but it's also like the problem is like it feels like we're just treading water
Mhm.
because that's what we're doing. We are treading water. We are waiting for there to be a major development of some
Mhm.
kind. I'm not saying what we're waiting for it to be. We're just waiting for something to happen, something to change because we're tired of sitting and waiting and being in this uncomfortable place where it's clear Fran and Maxwell love each other, but they're not together officially.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
again, we're Niles. Like,
exactly, we're Niles. And
love you.
exactly. So yeah,
So I guess
it's annoying that we have to like get through these
it's too
episodes.
much to hope that like Fran pointing everything out to Maxwell. It's too much to hope it's gonna stick
Right.
soon.
But like it's kind of one of those things where like we as the audience we feel like we're not only are we treading water but we're wasting time. And
Mhm.
that's as we'll see later Fran feels very pressed for time, you know.
Mhm.
As we've seen before Fran feels very pressed for time just in different
Mhm.
ways. So,
I will say, like, just not this doesn't have to do with that point, but just like I mentioned, like Maggie's reaction was very Maggie still.
mhm.
I'm still holding out hope that we'll see more character growth with Maggie.
Well, we'll definitely
Um,
see her do more adult things, shall we say.
okay. Because again, that I knew she was gonna react like that. I hate you. She's very quick on that kind of stuff.
She is.
But yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
No. How about you?
Nope.
All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next time when we'll be discussing episode 111 From Flushing with Love.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at afinetimenannyrevisited@gmail.com. Have a great week.